My name is Maria Hovis. And at 67 years old, I thought I had seen just about everything life could throw at me. But I never expected what happened on that quiet Sunday morning in Scottsdale. I was in my kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile floor, sipping the first coffee of the day. The house was still, filled with the hum of the ceiling fan and the scent of desert roses drifting in from the courtyard. It was one of those peaceful mornings that I treasured, the kind that made me thankful I had worked so hard to build this life. And then the doorbell rang. Now, let me be clear. Nobody just drops by at my house. The property sits behind a gated drive, a Spanish-style home I restored brick by brick after decades of working myself into the ground. If the doorbell rings, it means somebody has made it through the first gate, which only happens if I let them. So when I heard that chime, I froze. I tapped the screen on my security tablet, expecting to see a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor's gardener. Instead, I saw faces I hadn't laid eyes on in 17 years. My son Edmund, his wife Helen, and 2 teenagers I had never met, my grandchildren. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I even leaned closer, my heart pounding in my chest. But no, it was them, standing at my gate like ghosts pulled straight out of the past. 17 years. That's how long it had been since Edmund and Helen pushed me out of their lives. 17 years of birthdays, holidays, graduations, weddings, every milestone you can name, without a single invitation for me. And now, here they were, dressed up like they were paying a Sunday visit, pressing the buzzer at the home I built all on my own. I stood there, gripping the counter for balance, memories pouring back. The sting of exclusion is something you don't forget, no matter how many years pass. I remembered opening the mailbox only to find pictures from family reunions where my name wasn't even mentioned. I remembered Christmas mornings spent alone, looking at other people's family photos online, while mine pretended I didn't exist. I remembered the phone calls I made, the letters I wrote, all ignored or returned unopened. That kind of pain doesn't fade. It just settles deep inside you. And yet here they were. My son, the boy I raised through lean years after his father died. The woman who once smiled at me, but later told me I was too much of an embarrassment for their polished new life. And children who shared my blood, but didn't know me at all. I stared at the camera, trying to make sense of it. Why now? Why after all these years? Edmund looked older, of course. He had the same nervous habit he had as a child, fiddling with his hands when he didn't know what to say. Helen stood straight, her smile practiced, the kind of smile you put on when you need something. The teenagers looked curious, shifting from foot to foot, probably wondering why their parents dragged them to a stranger's house on a Sunday morning. My first instinct was to ignore them, just let them stand there until the Arizona sun forced them back into their car. 17 years of silence had taught me that I owed them nothing, but curiosity has a way of creeping in where logic tells you to shut the door. I couldn't help myself. What could possibly bring them here after all this time? I pressed the intercom. Yes. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Mom," Edmund said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "It's us. We'd like to talk." Talk. That word twisted in my gut. For years I begged for just that, one conversation, one chance to sit down and be heard. And every time they shut me out. Now, after nearly 2 decades, they show up unannounced at my gate and want to talk. I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough for Helen to lean in. "Maria, please. We know it's been a long time, but things have changed. We thought it was time." Time. Another word that made me wince. Time had passed, all right. Time I could never get back. Time when I should have been watching my grandchildren take their first steps, clapping at school plays, cheering at ball games. Instead, I was on the outside, invisible, while strangers knew more about them than I did. I tightened my grip on the counter. I could almost hear my own breath in the quiet house. I should have said no. I should have told them to turn around, that the bridge had burned long ago. But something inside me, some part of me, that still ached from years of being erased, made my finger hover over the button, and I pressed it. The gate swung open, and with it, 17 years of memories I thought I had buried came rushing back. As I waited for the knock on my door, I felt a storm brewing in my chest. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew this much. After what they had done, it wouldn't be small. And that's how it began. The morning my past walked straight back into my life, demanding a seat at the table I built without them. When I heard that knock on my door, my mind didn't just stay in the present. It went straight back to the years when everything fell apart, the years that pushed me to where I was standing that morning. I married young. My husband, Daniel, was my high school sweetheart. We thought we had forever, but forever turned into 12 short years. He passed suddenly from a heart attack, leaving me at 30 to raise our only child, Edmund, on my own. We were living in Columbus, Ohio then, in a modest little ranch house with a leaky roof and an old furnace that broke every other winter. Money was tight. I worked long hours at a medical billing office. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Every morning I packed Edmund's lunch, dropped him at school, and then caught the bus across town. I didn't have a car for the first few years, so that bus ride was my lifeline. At night, I'd bring home stacks of paperwork, sitting at the kitchen table until midnight while Edmund slept down the hall. I gave up a lot in those years, new clothes, vacations, dinners out. But I never let Edmund feel it. He had new notebooks at the start of every school year, a cake on his birthday, and shoes that fit when he outgrew the old ones. I told myself if I worked hard enough, one day he'd understand. When Edmund graduated high school with good grades, I was proud. He had dreams of business school, and I was determined to make it happen. I picked up weekend shifts, tightened the budget even more, and helped fill out every scholarship form we could find. Between my savings and student loans, we managed. Watching him walk across that stage with his diploma, I thought, this is it. We made it. Then Helen came into the picture. Edmund met her during his sophomore year of college. She was sharp, beautiful, and came from a family that had money. Real money. Her father was a dentist, her mother a stay-at-home hostess type, who wore pearls to the grocery store. I could tell right away they looked at me differently. I was just the woman who worked in an office, lived paycheck to paycheck, and drove a car that coughed smoke on cold mornings. Helen never said anything outright at first. It was in the way she sighed when I pulled out coupons at dinner, or the way her parents asked if Edmund had everything he needed right in front of me like I couldn't provide. I swallowed it down, telling myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that Edmund was happy. But as the years went on, the distance grew. Edmund stopped coming home for holidays, saying it was easier to stay near campus. When he and Helen got engaged, I wasn't asked to help with the wedding planning. Her family handled it all, and I was told to just enjoy the day. At the reception, I sat at a table near the back, smiling while they toasted Helen's family for supporting the couple every step of the way. My name wasn't mentioned once. Still, I kept showing up. I sent cards, called, and tried to stay connected. I thought maybe time would soften things. But what happened at that family reunion 17 years ago proved otherwise. It was Helen's relatives who planned it. They rented a big hall just outside Cleveland, and families from both sides were invited. I showed up with a casserole, my mother's recipe, the one everyone used to ask for at church gatherings. I walked in hopeful, telling myself maybe this was a chance to be included, to find my place. I hadn't even set the dish on the table when I noticed the looks. Helen's mother leaned toward another woman and whispered something, both of them glancing at me before laughing softly. Helen herself greeted me with a stiff hug, then quickly steered Edmund to a group across the room. I tried to brush it off, but it was hard to ignore the way people shifted away when I joined a circle, or how conversations went quiet when I walked up. I told myself it was my imagination, until it wasn't. Near the end of the evening, as people were lining up for dessert, Helen's father clinked his glass and started thanking everyone for coming. He talked about family, about how proud he was of his daughter and Edmund, about traditions and togetherness. And then, in front of everyone, he said, "We're grateful to have such a fine circle, free from unnecessary drama. Sometimes it's best to keep gatherings simple, with only those who truly fit." I felt the heat rise in my face, but I stayed quiet. Then Helen, standing right next to him, added, "Yes, sometimes it's easier without extra complications. We want our children to grow up with examples of grace, not embarrassment." People laughed politely, and I stood frozen with a paper plate in my hands. I knew exactly who they meant. I was the embarrassment, the complication. Afterwards, when I tried to speak to Edmund privately, he wouldn't look me in the eye. Finally, he muttered, "Mom, maybe it's better if you don't come to these things. It's just easier." Easier. That was the word that cut deepest. Easier for him to erase me than to stand up for me. From that night on, the door shut for good. No more invitations. No more phone calls. I was left off mailing lists. Holidays came and went, and I spent them alone. When I sent gifts, they were returned unopened. When I called, I got voicemail. And slowly, painfully, I realized I had been cut out not just by Helen, but by my own son. That was 17 years ago. 17 years of silence. 17 years of watching life go on without me. And now, after all that, they were standing at my gate, asking to come in. When that door closed on me, all those years ago, I thought the loneliness might swallow me whole. But if life has taught me anything, it's this: no one is coming to rescue you. You either fall apart or you get to work. And work is what I knew best. At the time, I already had a little side business. I'd been doing bookkeeping for a few neighbors and small shops in town. Mostly word-of-mouth jobs, helping folks organize their ledgers, balance accounts, file taxes. Nothing fancy. I'd started it years earlier just to bring in extra cash when Edmund was little. But after the reunion incident, when I was cut off, I poured myself into that business like my life depended on it. My weekdays were spent at the medical billing office, but evenings and weekends belonged to my clients. I worked out of my kitchen, spreading receipts and notebooks across the table, a small calculator always at my side. Some nights, I didn't look up from the numbers until the sky outside turned gray with morning. It wasn't easy. I missed sleep. I missed time for myself. But the busier I stayed, the less I had to think about the empty chair at my holiday table or the phone that never rang. Slowly, the work grew. A friend of a friend needed help. A small church asked me to straighten out their books. Then a retiree who was nervous about losing track of her savings called me. Before long, I had more work than I could handle. I took a risk, quit the billing office, and put everything into my bookkeeping business full-time. The first year was rough. I lived lean. No vacations, no eating out, no extras. I remember patching holes in my old winter coat because buying a new one felt like a luxury I couldn't justify. But the bills were paid, and I was finally my own boss. By year 3, I had hired 2 part-time helpers, women like me who needed steady income and flexibility. Together, we built a reputation for honesty and accuracy. I noticed a gap that most bigger firms ignored: retirees and small family businesses. These folks didn't need high-end consultants. They needed someone patient who spoke plain English and wouldn't charge them an arm and a leg. That became our specialty. We helped retirees track pensions and Social Security so nothing slipped through the cracks. We guided mom-and-pop shops through taxes without scaring them with jargon. We showed them how to make a budget, how to stretch their dollars, how to stay out of debt. The more I helped, the more my business grew. By my early 50s, it wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It was a full financial services company. I called it Hovis Financial, and before long, we had an office downtown. I still worked 70-hour weeks, but it felt different now. It wasn't survival anymore. It was building. I saw the relief in people's eyes when we solved problems for them. I saw the trust they placed in me. That meant more to me than the family that had shut me out. Then, when I turned 58, I made the biggest decision of my career. A regional firm wanted to buy part of my company. The deal was good, better than I ever expected. I kept a share, so I'd still be involved, but I sold enough to free myself financially for the first time in my life. For the first time since Daniel passed, I wasn't worried about whether I could make rent or pay bills. I had real security, and with that, I started looking for ways to put my money to work. That's when I discovered real estate in Arizona. I'd been to Scottsdale a few times for conferences and vacations. Something about the desert, the wide skies, the dry heat, the mountains in the distance spoke to me. Houses that were growing in value, especially older properties that needed love. So I took another risk. I bought a worn-down Spanish-style home on the edge of town. The roof leaked, the walls were cracked, the yard was dust and weeds. People thought I was crazy, but I rolled up my sleeves. I hired local contractors, learned what I could about renovations, and oversaw every detail. It took nearly 2 years, but when it was finished, that house was worth more than double what I paid. I sold it and bought 2 more. That became my second act. I reinvested profits, one property after another, until I wasn't just flipping houses. I was building a portfolio. By the time I was 65, I wasn't worried about money ever again. I had the house I live in now, plus rental properties bringing in steady income. Every brick, every dollar, every long night. I built it without Edmund, without Helen, without the reunions that never included me. My independence became my greatest strength. Standing in my mansion today, with its tiled courtyard and blooming roses, I see more than walls and furniture. I see proof that being discarded didn't end me. It remade me. That's what makes seeing Edmund at my gate so strange. For years, they wanted nothing to do with me. I wasn't good enough for their tables, their pictures, their children's birthdays. Yet everything I have now, the success, the comfort, the peace, I earned after they shut me out. And that morning, as they stood there pressing my buzzer, I wondered if they saw it too. The truth is, money filled my bank account, but it didn't fill the empty space in my heart. 17 years is a long time. And during those years, silence from your own child starts to feel like a second kind of death. At first, I told myself it was temporary. I thought maybe Edmund just needed time. I mailed cards, birthday wishes, Christmas greetings, simple notes asking how he was. Some came back unopened. The envelope stamped returned to sender. The few that made it through were never answered. I kept writing for a while, but after enough silence, I stopped. A one-sided conversation hurts worse than saying nothing at all. Then came the photos. Social media made it impossible not to see. A neighbor's daughter, who was friends with someone in Helen's family, once showed me a post without realizing what it meant to me. They all were Edmund, Helen, and a crowd of smiling relatives at a big summer reunion. The caption read, "Another year with everyone together." Everyone except me. It went on like that for years. Baby showers with balloons and cake. Thanksgiving tables full of cousins and grandparents. pictures of birthdays where candles were blown out on cakes I wasn't invited to bake. Each photo was like a small cut, reminding me I wasn't part of their picture anymore. The hardest moment of all was learning I had grandchildren without even being told. I found out by accident. I was at the grocery store, pushing my cart past the dairy section, when I ran into a woman who used to live on my street back in Ohio. She smiled politely and said, "Congratulations, Maria. I didn't know you were a grandmother." I must have looked blank because she tilted her head and said, "Oh, didn't you hear? Edmund and Helen had a little girl last month." I nodded like I already knew, but my knees nearly gave out. Later, when I checked online, I saw the picture of a newborn swaddled in pink with a caption from Helen, "Our hearts are full." My name wasn't mentioned, not even a text. A whole life had entered the world, tied to mine by blood, and I had been erased from the story. That was the day I cried the longest. I sat in my car in the parking lot, clutching the steering wheel, asking myself over and over, where did I go wrong? Did I fail Edmund as a mother? Or did Helen's family simply win the fight to shut me out? Guilt is heavy. For a long time, I carried it like a stone. Every success I built in my business was matched by a whisper in my head. If you had been better, they wouldn't have left you. I replayed memories from when Edmund was young, looking for signs I might have missed. Did I work too many hours? Did I hold on too tightly after Daniel died? Did I embarrass him in ways I didn't see? But no matter how many times I turned it over, I couldn't find an answer that justified complete rejection. And eventually I had to accept that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people close. So I filled the silence with other things. I leaned on church. At first, I just went on Sundays to sit in the back pew where no one would notice me. But gradually I found a group of women who understood loneliness. Some were widows, some divorced, some cut off by children, just like me. We started sharing meals, celebrating small victories, filling in the gaps for one another. Those women became my circle, the ones who checked in if I was sick or dropped off food when I was working late. I also discovered a love for gardening. When I moved to Arizona, I was warned nothing green would survive. But I learned that with patience and the right care, you could coax roses to bloom in the desert. I built a garden in my backyard, brick by brick, bed by bed. Planting became therapy. Watching life push through dry soil reminded me that broken things can grow again. And then there was mentoring. By my late 50s, young women started asking me how I had built my business. They wanted to know how to handle clients, manage money, avoid mistakes I had made. I never planned to be a mentor, but every time I sat across from a younger woman with hope in her eyes, I felt useful again. I told them what no one told me, that they were capable, that independence mattered, and that no one could define their worth but themselves. Those years of silence hurt, but they also shaped me. They taught me where to put my energy. They reminded me that family isn't just who shares your blood. Family is also who sits with you at the table when no one else shows up. Still, I would be lying if I said the wound fully closed. I never stopped wondering about the grandchildren. Were they healthy? Did they like school? Did they even know my name? I hoped one day they might ask about me, but I never expected to see them standing at my gate. 17 years passed like that, me building my life, them building theirs, two separate worlds that never touched, until the morning they showed up unannounced at my door, breaking the silence I had been forced to live with all those years. When I finally settled in Arizona, I promised myself one thing. If I was going to build a home again, it would reflect the woman I had become, not the woman my family threw away. The house I chose was far from perfect. It was an old Spanish-style estate just outside Scottsdale. The roof sagged, the tiles were cracked, and the walls carried years of neglect. Some people saw a burden. I saw a chance. I had spent my whole life patching holes and fixing what others thought was beyond repair. This house was no different. The courtyard was my favorite part. Right in the center stood a dry, broken fountain covered in dust. I looked at it and thought, if I can make this run again, then I can make anything bloom. It took months of work, contractors, plumbers, and more money than I expected. But the day water flowed through that fountain again, I felt like life itself had returned to me. I poured myself into every corner of that property. Each room was a reflection of survival. The kitchen became wide and bright, with space for a long wooden table that could hold more people than I'd ever had at holidays. The living room opened to tall windows where the desert sun filled the space with gold in the mornings. I built a library lined with shelves of books I'd collected through the years because I wanted a place where quiet could be a comfort instead of a punishment. And then there was the garden. If the fountain was my first victory, the rose garden was my soul. Everyone told me roses wouldn't last in the desert. Too dry, too hot, too harsh. But I've learned that things grow if you tend to them with care, even in hard places. I planted them one by one, reds, yellows, pinks, and soft white. At first they looked weak, but with water, shade, and patience, they grew stronger. Now, when I step outside, the air smells sweet, and I see proof that new beginnings are always possible. That garden is more than flowers. It's where I go when my heart feels heavy. It's where I sit when I want to pray. And it's where I remind myself that being left out of one family doesn't mean you stop belonging altogether. As the years passed, that house became more than a roof over my head. It became a gathering place. I hosted potlucks with neighbors, inviting the widows and widowers down the street who didn't like eating alone. My church group held Bible studies at my kitchen table, and we often ended up laughing louder than we read. On birthdays, my friends brought cakes and cards, and the sound of candles being blown out filled the walls that once echoed with silence. That house taught me something important. You can build a chosen family. You can open your doors to people who appreciate you, even if the ones tied by blood have walked away. I remember one Christmas Eve in particular. My living room was filled with friends from church, their kids running around with plates of cookies, and the tree glowing in the corner. At one point, I stood in the doorway just watching them. The laughter, the clinking of dishes, the warmth. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the woman who'd been cast aside. I felt like the woman who created a new home for herself and others. And that is what makes the contrast so sharp. While Edmund and Helen shut me out, building a life that erased me, I built my own circle. They chose silence. I chose community. They crossed my name out of invitations. I wrote down names of people who showed up for me when I needed them. Do I still think about what I missed? Of course I do. I missed rocking my grandchildren as babies. I missed graduations and birthdays that should have had my name on the guest list. That loss is real and nothing can erase it. But when I walk through my rose garden, I remind myself I was not the one who left. I was the one who stayed, who kept trying until trying no longer had any dignity left. The mansion I live in now isn't about money or status. It's about proof. Proof that the woman who was told she was an embarrassment built something beautiful anyway. Proof that survival can turn into success, even when others doubt you. Proof that I could create a space full of laughter and love, even if my own child chose not to be part of it. So when I looked at the camera that morning and saw Edmund and Helen standing outside the very gates of the life I had built, it struck me. For 17 years, they kept me away from their tables, and now they wanted to sit at mine. And I knew whatever reason they had for showing up. It wasn't small. When the buzzer rang again to signal the gate had opened, I stood in the entryway, steadying myself. My house had seen neighbors, friends, pastors, and children running through its halls. But it had never seen Edmund and Helen walk its floors. For 17 years, they had chosen to erase me. And now, here they were. The knock came soft at first, then firmer. I pulled open the heavy wooden door, and there they stood. Edmund looked older than his 43 years, shoulders slouched, eyes tired. Helen wore that same fixed smile. I remembered, the one that looked warm but never reached her eyes. Behind them stood two teenagers, a boy and a girl, my grandchildren. They stared at me like they weren't sure whether to call me a stranger or family. The boy shoved his hands in his pockets, while the girl looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the tall arches of my house. "Mom," Edmund said finally, shifting from foot to foot. "Maria," Helen added quickly, stepping forward with outstretched arms. "You look wonderful." I didn't move to hug her. I nodded instead. "Come in." They stepped inside, their shoes clicking on the tile floor. The teenagers craned their necks at the vaulted ceilings and the open courtyard beyond the glass doors. I could see it in their faces. This was not what they expected from the woman their parents had cut out all these years. "This place is beautiful," Helen said, her voice just a little too sweet. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone even. Edmund glanced at the fountain in the courtyard, water spilling gently from tier to tier. "You've done well for yourself," he muttered, half admiration, half something else I couldn't quite name. I gestured to the living room. "Sit." They settled onto the couches, the children side by side, while Helen crossed her legs neatly, smoothing her skirt. Edmund leaned forward, elbows on his knees, avoiding my eyes. I poured coffee into cups from the tray I had prepared. It gave me something to do with my hands, though my mind was racing. "How have you been?" I asked, though the question came out more formal than I intended. Helen jumped in. "Busy. You know how life is with teenagers. School, activities. Time just flies." I looked at the children. "What are your names?" The girl spoke first. "I'm Anna." She gave me a polite smile. The boy lifted his chin. "Caleb." "Nice to meet you," I said, and I meant it. Meeting them should have been joyful, but under the weight of 17 silent years, it felt heavy instead. The conversation dipped into small talk. Helen complimented the rugs, asked about the artwork. Edmund asked when I moved to Arizona, though I was sure he already knew. I answered politely, but I could feel something building. They hadn't come all this way just for coffee. Finally, the words came. Edmund cleared his throat. "Mom, we didn't just come to catch up. We need to talk about something serious." Helen placed her hand on his arm, as if to steady him. Then she turned to me, voice soft, rehearsed. "Things have been difficult for us. Edmund's business, it collapsed last year. He tried everything, but the contracts dried up. And I lost my teaching job this spring when the school downsized. We've been trying to make ends meet, but..." She paused, eyes shining just enough to look sympathetic. "We're on the edge of losing our home." I sat very still. Edmund looked up, finally meeting my eyes. "We thought maybe you could help us. A loan, just enough to get back on our feet." There it was. The reason they were here. Not reconciliation, not regret. Money. I looked at them carefully, my hands folded in my lap. Helen leaned forward slightly, as though she thought persuasion might soften me. Edmund fidgeted with his fingers, the same nervous habit he had as a boy. Anna and Caleb sat quietly, confusion flickering across their faces. For years, I had pictured this moment, the day they might return. I thought maybe it would be with an apology, or at least a conversation about the years lost. Instead, it was about dollars. 17 years, I said slowly, 17 years of silence. And now you're here because you want money. Edmund flushed. "It's not like that." We thought. Helen cut in quickly. We thought maybe this could be a chance to reconnect. Families go through hard times. This could bring us closer again. Her words rang hollow. Closer, after years of being told I was unwanted. Closer, after missing every milestone of my grandchildren's lives. I glanced at Anna and Caleb. They were still watching me, not sure what any of this meant. I softened my voice when I looked at them, but inside, a storm was building. They had chosen their time carefully. They came not when I was lonely, not when I was grieving, not when I had begged for a place at the table. They came when they needed saving. And I realized right then, this conversation was about to test every boundary I had fought to build. I let their words hang in the air for a moment. Edmund stared at his hands. Helen kept that smile plastered on her face, and the children sat quiet, waiting for what I would say next. Instead of answering right away, I stood and walked to my study. When I came back, I carried a folder. Inside it were the pieces of proof I had kept over the years, the reminders of why I had been forced to let go. Some might call it holding on, but for me, it was a record, a way to remind myself that what happened wasn't in my head. I laid the folder on the coffee table and opened it slowly. Before we talk about money, I said, keeping my voice steady, let's talk about history. Helen shifted uncomfortably. Edmund looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. I pulled out the first page. A letter. Do you remember this? I asked. Edmund squinted, then went pale. I read aloud. Mom, you need to stop interfering in our family. Helen and I want peace, and that means moving forward without you. Please respect that. Do not contact us again. I lowered the paper and looked straight at him. You wrote that 17 years ago, Edmund. I didn't forget. You asked me to disappear from your life. And I did. The room fell quiet. Anna's mouth opened a little. Caleb's eyes darted between me and his father. They had never heard this before. I set the letter aside and pulled out the next item. A printed photo. It was one I'd seen online years ago. I slid it across the table. Do you see this? It was a family reunion picture. A long picnic table covered in food. Smiling faces all around. Edmund, Helen, her parents, cousins, aunts, uncles. Children sat on laps. Teenagers stood in the back row. The caption beneath it read, "Complete family together." I tapped the words with my finger. Complete. That's what you wrote, Edmund. That's what you wanted the world to believe. That your family was whole without me. I saw it, even though you never sent me an invitation. Helen tried to speak. Maria, that was years ago. People. I held up my hand. Don't. You meant it. You erased me. Don't pretend now. The children leaned in to look at the photo. Anna whispered, Dad, you never told us. Edmund rubbed his forehead, but said nothing. Then I pulled out the last item, an empty wedding invitation envelope, one I had never received. I found out about the wedding from a neighbor who asked me if I needed a ride. I brought the envelope as a reminder of that day. Your wedding, I said quietly. I wasn't invited. I heard about it from someone at the grocery store. My own son got married, and I wasn't welcome to sit in the back pew, wasn't even told the date. Do you know what that does to a mother? Edmund's face reddened. Helen looked down at her lap, finally losing that polished smile. I placed all 3 items on the table in front of them. The letter, the photo, the reminder of the wedding I missed. These are my receipts. I said plainly, this is why I stopped showing up. This is why the calls stopped. You told me to go, and you lived like I didn't exist. The weight of silence filled the room. Anna blinked rapidly, as if she was trying not to cry. Caleb shook his head slowly, stunned. They were hearing for the first time that their father had cut me out. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. So tell me, Edmund, did you ever miss me? Or is it just my money you miss now? He swallowed hard. Mom, it wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple, I said firmly. You decided it was easier to remove me than to stand up for me. You made your choice. And now you're here because you've run out of options. Helen spoke quickly, her voice sharp now. We came because we thought maybe you'd want a chance to be part of the family again. We thought you'd be happy to know your grandchildren. I looked at her evenly. I would have loved to know them from the beginning, but you made sure I didn't. Don't twist this into generosity. You're not offering me a place. You're asking for help because you need it. Anna spoke up softly. Dad, is this true? Did you really tell her not to come? Edmund's shoulders slumped. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he whispered, Yes. The children stared at him, betrayed. The truth was out now, and it wasn't pretty. I gathered the papers back into the folder and closed it. 17 years, I said quietly. 17 years of silence, while I built my life without you. I didn't expect you to show up here, but I knew if you ever did, it wouldn't be out of love. It would be out of need. And here we are. The room stayed heavy with silence. The children looked at me with new eyes, Edmund with shame, Helen with frustration. And I sat there calm, because for the first time in a long time, I held the truth right in front of them. I sat back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, letting the silence stretch until Helen shifted uncomfortably and Edmund stared at the floor. The folder of proof was closed, the truth laid bare. Now, it was time for my answer. You've made your request, I said slowly, but I need you to hear mine. Helen leaned forward, hope flickering across her face. Edmund looked at me like a child waiting for a verdict. The teenagers stayed still, their eyes locked on me. I will not give you money to save your house or restart a business. I said plainly, I worked too many hours, gave up too much of my life to pour my savings into people who cut me out without hesitation. That chapter is closed. Helen's smile vanished. Maria, you don't understand how desperate we are. We could lose everything. I met her gaze, steady and calm. I do understand. I've been desperate before. The difference is when I was desperate, I worked harder. I didn't run back to people I'd rejected. Edmund raised his head, his face red. So you're just going to turn your back on us, on me. I didn't turn my back. Edmund, I said firmly, you turned yours. I lived 17 years without your voice, without your presence. You made it clear I wasn't part of your life. You don't get to erase me when it's easy and then call me family when you need a check. He dropped his eyes again, shoulders sagging. Helen crossed her arms, her tone sharper now. So that's it. You have all this money, this big house, and you're going to sit there and let your own son drown. I leaned forward slightly. No, I'm going to do something different. Something you may not like, but something I believe is right. I turned to the children. Anna, Caleb, I don't know you the way I should. I should have been there when you were born, when you started school. But I wasn't given the chance. That wasn't your fault. And I won't let you carry the weight of decisions made before you had a say. They looked at me, uncertain, but listening. I will set up college funds for both of you. I continued. The accounts will be managed by professionals. You'll be able to use them only for education expenses, tuition, books, housing. Your parents will not be able to touch a single dollar. That way, no matter what happens, you will have a future that isn't tied to the mistakes of the past. Helen's face tightened. That's insulting. You don't trust us. I looked at her evenly. I don't trust people who told me I was an embarrassment and erased me from their lives. I trust my grandchildren, And I want them to have opportunities, not hand-me-down consequences. Anna's lips pressed together, but I saw her eyes brighten. Caleb gave a small nod, almost like a thank you he didn't know how to put into words. Edmund finally spoke, his voice low. "Mom, we really do need help now. The kids can't wait for some fun years from now. We're losing our house." I shook my head. "You have to face the results of your choices. I won't bail you out. That wouldn't help you grow or change. But I won't punish the children for your decisions either. My line is clear." The room felt heavy with the weight of it. Helen's cheeks flushed with anger. Edmund looked ashamed, torn between pride and need. The children looked quietly relieved, as if they had been given a gift they didn't expect. Helen stood abruptly. "We didn't come here to be insulted." "No," I said, standing as well. "You came here expecting me to forget the past and open my wallet. That's not happening. I can't rewrite what you did to me, but I can choose not to repeat it with your children." Edmund rose slowly, his voice rough. "I never thought it would come to this." "It came to this the day you decided I was easier to erase than defend," I answered. "I didn't walk away, Edmund. You pushed me out. And now I'm drawing a line that protects me, but still gives Anna and Caleb a chance. That's as far as I'll go." The children stood too, their faces conflicted but grateful. Anna whispered, "Thank you," so softly I almost missed it. Caleb looked at the floor, but gave a slight nod. I walked them to the door, steady and calm. Helen stormed past me, without a word. Edmund lingered for a second, his eyes wet, but he didn't speak. Finally, he followed his wife. I closed the door behind them, leaning my hand against the wood. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I felt steady. For once, I hadn't been pulled back into their game of rejection and need. I had set my own boundary and stood by it, and as I looked through the glass at my rose garden, I reminded myself of one truth. I won't reward cruelty, but I won't punish children for it either. After the door shut behind them, I stood for a moment with my hand pressed against the wood. My heart was steady, not racing the way it once did when Edmund's name came up. I felt no urge to chase after them, no panic about what they might think of me. What I felt instead was release. I walked out into my garden. The sun was starting to dip low, spilling warm light over the roses. The air was quiet except for the trickle of water from the fountain. I sat on the bench I had placed there years ago and let out a long breath. For 17 years, I had carried the weight of rejection. I had replayed every memory, wondering what I could have done differently. And for 17 years, I thought if they ever returned, I might crumble under the pressure of wanting their approval. But here I was still standing, and I hadn't bent to guilt. I had set my line, and I had kept it. The roses reminded me why. They grew strong because I tended them, not because the desert was kind. They thrived because I created the conditions for them to survive. That was me, too. I had built a life not because it was easy, but because I refused to wither. The next week, I went to my church women's group. We meet in the fellowship hall on Wednesday evenings, a circle of women who have all walked through their share of storms. I shared what had happened. I told them about the knock at my door, about the request for money, about the folder of receipts I laid on the table. When I finished, there was a quiet pause. Then one of the women, a widow named Ruth, leaned forward and said, "Maria, you did what a lot of us are afraid to do. You stood your ground. Family is who shows up for you, not who shuts you out." The others nodded, and I felt a wave of peace settle over me. She was right. Family isn't about titles or bloodlines. It's about presence. It's about who is there when the storms hit, not just when they need shelter. Driving home that night, I realized something else. For years, I had hoped for an apology, some recognition of the pain they caused. But facing them showed me I didn't need their words anymore. I had already healed in the ways that mattered. Their choices had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me. I don't know what will happen with Edmund and Helen now. Maybe they'll be angry forever. Maybe one day the children will reach out to me on their own. Either way, I'm at peace with it. I know I gave the children something solid, an opportunity, a door to a future, and I know I refused to let myself be used. That balance was enough. Standing in my garden tonight, I thought of all the women like me, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, who have felt the sting of being cut out, erased from tables they once built meals upon. It's a deep hurt, one that lingers. But I want to tell you this. You are stronger than the silence. You can build again. You can find love and belonging in places you never expected. So now I turn to you. Have you ever been cut out by family only for them to come back when they needed you? What did you do? Would you have let them back in or stood your ground? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Sharing helps all of us remember we're not alone in this. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who might need encouragement, and subscribe to this channel. There are more stories here, stories of strength, survival, and finding your voice even when others try to silence it. Because in the end, family isn't about who claims you when it's convenient. Family is about who chooses you, who stands with you, and who shows up when it matters most. And that truth, I've learned, is more valuable than any mansion, any check, or any apology that may never come.